post-COVID in every corner of the world is whether governments should embark on a program where infrastructure and concrete and steel takes precedence over direct human interventions. And that is the debate we ought to have in this House. Do you spend all that money on concrete and steel at a time when your people are struggling for basic necessities, Mr. Speaker? People have lost their jobs. Morale is at an all-time low. People's confidence has been shattered. And we have a responsibility to those persons, Mr. Speaker, to the citizenry, to restore confidence, to prop morale. People have taken loans and they come to your constituency office and tell you they've not worked for 2 months. They've been laid off and they do not know what the future holds. And I'm not holding anybody in here responsible for that, Mr. Speaker. That is the reality that confronts the world. And St. Lucia has not been spared. And I'm saying, in an environment where you have people who are depressed and who are genuinely concerned, the question has to be asked. Does $7.9 million US have to be spent on a road today? Can that wait? And can those monies be channeled to provide social relief to the people of our country? But Mr. Speaker, we've seen bad decisions. We've seen misplaced and misguided priorities. And COVID is responsible for slowing us down. And during that slowdown, Mr. Speaker, there was an opportunity for introspection. COVID-19 et le coronavirus, ils ont forcé tout pays la terre, et le gouvernement ça a yon, pour juste faire des affaires anti-tac plus slow, ou qu'à move top pressé. Et quand nous avons dit, en temps que COVID a slow nous down, il y a une opportunité pour nous catcher les manières nous faire des bagailles. Nous n'y pouvons faire des bagailles différentes. Nous n'avons pas un choix. We have no choice but to begin to do things differently, Mr. Speaker. This COVID situation has provided us with a platform for genuine dialogue. I said this only last week. And in the words of a former Choiseul MP, you can't have one club in the golf bag. You have to embrace many, many more. All ideas have to contend. Our suggestions have to be respected and they have to be valued for what they are. We all come here from mandate from our constituencies. All of us. We are speaking on behalf of our people. Nothing that is said here, Mr. Speaker, is meant to be personal. But these are genuine and sincere concerns. Today, Tuesday, the 2nd of June, 2020, when the world is still stumbling, trying to get on its feet, and when individual countries, Mr. Speaker, are still flat on the ground and don't know how they're going to stand up, I am asking on behalf of the people of Denrenough, $7.9 million US. Should that go into a road today? Or should that go in the form of support for a lot of people in this country who are disenfranchised, who have been disenfranchised as a result of COVID? Mr. Speaker, I would have had no hesitation this morning. I would have been more comfortable had the Minister for Finance come to seek approval to borrow $7,945,000 US for the reinstatement of the laptop program. And you know why? Because of the disruption I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, our children are at the center of it. A laptop computer is an instructional tool today. And across the world, children have to receive the tuition from the comfort of their homes. And when we introduced the laptop program as an administration, not only were we trying to bridge that digital gap, but we understood that in a small developing country like St. Lucia, your ability to use the technology, your ability to resort to technology to get things done was already an imperative, so that the child in a global environment from Japan and Singapore would not have had any distinct advantage over a child from Lapel, Garrett, Olio, or Belmont.
right.
And that was the thinking. That was the rationale.
That's correct.
But they came into government and they stopped the laptop program. And to be fair to them, Mr. Speaker, they did not know we were going to have COVID and that our children would not have been able to report to schools. But that is the situation that confronts us today. So had the Prime Minister come in here this morning and presented the motion asking for us to borrow 21 million EC dollars for the laptop program, Mr. Speaker, the member for Denry North would have supported it. Had the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, come into this house this morning and he presented a resolution to borrow 7 million US dollars, I would have been more amenable. I would have been more amenable had he reintroduced or reinstated the distress fund. And the distress fund was just a little $400,000, $500,000. That's the same amount that was spent on a swearing-in ceremony. And you know what has happened, Mr. Speaker? Just during this state of emergency since COVID, we have had several fires affecting the people for whom the distress fund was first implemented. Je dis bon matin, that si le gouvernement est venu au Parlement pour prêter l'argent, 7 millions de dollars américains, pour mettre laptop programme VIE en l'école, moi, je suis ici porté. Et je crois que tout le monde façade ça est ici porté. Et je dis aussi, Mr. Speaker, that si le gouvernement est venu ici à bon matin pour prêter l'argent, pour mettre distress fund dans VIE, moi, je suis ici porté. Just in this COVID period, we have had several fires. And when you read the headlines, on Thursday, May 14th, mother and children homeless after Cicero fire. At least 3 people made homeless by Leclerc fire. And there's so many others, Mr. Speaker. And that distress fund, I saw people from my constituency benefiting firsthand from that particular social facility. Mr. Speaker, I've given the story of a gentleman in my constituency called Shat, William O'Culey, when his house was gutted and burnt to the ground. He didn't have anybody to turn to. He didn't have insurance. He had no steady job. But he was able, over time, to accumulate sufficient plywood and building material to give himself and his children a shelter. And he got the distressing call. He was in the garden. By the time he got to Belmont, the house was burnt to the ground. And he cried like a baby because he did not know how he was going to recover. And as the parliamentary rep, I made representation on his behalf to the then Prime Minister. The fire service had to provide a technical report, and all the other social agencies had to come on board. And today, thanks to the distress fund, he has a roof on his head. And for every single member of parliament, between the period 2011 to 2016, who was confronted by situations like the one I just described, their constituents, and indirectly they benefited from the distress fund. So I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that this 7 million US that we are borrowing for the Millennium Highway, had it been for the distress fund, I would have supported it. I would have supported it. Mr. Speaker, if the Minister for Finance, notwithstanding the concerns I've expressed about the borrowing, had come to this house this morning seeking approval of Parliament for 7.9 million US to strengthen the banana management unit under the Ministry of Agriculture, I would have supported it. If the money was being borrowed this morning, Mr. Speaker, to hire a crop protection officer so that when our fruits have been cultivated here, packaged, transported to Barbados, they would not have been rejected. I would have supported money for this. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that the Millennium Highway, as it is in a chronic state of disrepair. It has been the subject of laughter. It has been a subject in theatrical presentations. And I think it is the popular group, Chekapesh, who said that we have a roller coaster ride. You just have to drive on the Millennium Highway. We all recognize, and I said as far back as 2013, 14, and 15, not only did he recognize that the road was in a poor condition, he actually took measures or steps as an administration to try and get the road repaired. But COVID, as I said, being the global game changer that it is, has sent us back to basics. It has asked us to reprioritize. And the question is being asked today, is this the best use of $7.9 million US today in St. Lucia, at a time when we cannot reinstate the distress fund, we cannot provide laptop computers to our children, banana farmers cannot get compensated adequately for their efforts, public servants are at edge, and the government is under a tremendous amount of stress to pay public servants. Is this the best use of that money today? Je vais poser une question. Le gouvernement venu pour 7,9 millions d'Américains. Qui a changé, c'est 21 millions de dollars cette ici. En temps que le gouvernement passe à maman l'école laptop. Maman l'école passe à l'école pour teacher instruire que il a fait avant. Il pour rester caillou et que nous pouvons instruire à le computer, laptop et le phone. Et que la majorité maman c'est ici par le laptop. Si le gouvernement est venu ici à bon matin, et dit qu'il aura prêté pour bailler toute maman ici un laptop, moi je vais supporter. Si le gouvernement est venu ici et dit qu'il a calculé, il a fait l'erreur qu'en 2016 pour 2020, il a tiré distress fund, ce qui a été là encore au joindre si pour si caillou brûlé et brûler l'autre accident de bail qui fait et pour passer en décor. Si vous avez venu ici à bon matin pour prêter 7,9 millions de dollars américains, pour ça, moi je vais supporter vous, Mr. Speaker. Si le gouvernement est venu ici à bon matin et dit nous avons coûté l'opposition, nous avons coûté les femmes, nous avons coûté l'autre monde technique, et bon matin nous avons dit que nous avons fait l'erreur. Et nous avons prêté l'argent pour bailler une femme en figue, plus pour planter figue et pour vendre figue, moi je vais supporter ça. Mais moi je dis, Mr. Speaker, même comme on est monde qui dit machine eux-mêmes, private vehicle owners. You have minibuses who use the Millennium Highway. Of course they need a break. I know several drivers from my constituency and those who ply the Viewford route. They do not use the Millennium Highway anymore. They prefer to go through the Mon. And that is consistent with what the leader of the opposition said, and I reiterated, that the road is in an advanced state of disrepair. But nobody knew COVID was coming. We did not see it on the horizon. It came like a thief in the night. And it is forcing us to rethink how we do things moving forward. And this can never be a priority. In as much as I empathize with the bus drivers, the private users of this road, the question has to be asked, is this the best way to use that money today? Mr. Speaker, I cannot go to my constituency this evening and tell my constituents of La Pelle that $9 million or $7 million US dollars has been borrowed, and as a consequence of that, your road will be fixed. I cannot go to Olio and Garrett and tell the elderly lady that she will no longer have to walk to the Gap to get a shuttle to go to the Richmond Health Center because the Larissos Health Center will be reinstated. I can't, Mr. Speaker. I can't. And that is why I mentioned earlier. Gouvernement n'est pas faire une décision. Est-ce que ça c'est plus bon pour dépenser l'argent en l'air concret et style, ou est-ce que ça c'est en l'air qu'on supposé dépenser l'argent et ça nous a créé the provision of social services? Mais ça c'est un gouvernement nous qui met des affaires cheval à sous affaires moun. And I was in Viewford on October the 19th, 2019. Skyless cargo, a McDonnell Douglas MD-11 aircraft. Mr. Speaker, big plane. And for the average person who's listening, it is longer than the Virgin Atlantic aircraft that comes here, the 330. That should give you an indication of the size of that aircraft. And I have a passion for aviation. There's two things that fascinate me. Yes, I've learned from my colleague from the RD. Mr. Speaker, I saw this aircraft And as I always do when I'm in Viewport, I pull out my camera. And I wanted to take photos. And I studied the aircraft to see what was there. And then I saw they were lowering the cargo. And then, Mr. Speaker, I saw the horses coming out. I saw police immigration vehicles. I saw SSU vehicles in the vicinity of the airport. Right there, Mr. Speaker. Horses. And I've been told, and I'm prepared to sit down if anybody can say something to the contrary, that it costs more than $500,000 for this plane to have transported horses from the US to here on the International Airport. And we cannot reinstate a distress fund, and a lot of you on this side represent rural constituencies. Mr. Speaker, I've said before, I understand collective responsibility, but there are times when you have to denounce wrong, and you have to speak out against it. That could never be right in St. Lucia. For us to have $500,000 being spent for an aircraft to transport horses into this country, and we cannot reinstate a distress fund. We cannot provide laptop computers to the children of this country. We cannot compensate farmers when they have toiled hard and they've sold their food. Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I remember. My colleague is misleading the House. I mean, I like it, but I cannot stay here for my colleague to mislead the country, to give the impression that the government paid $500,000. You said it. I never said it. That's what you're trying to do. You must stop that. I never said the government paid.
Honorable member. Honorable member. Honorable member. Yeah. Honorable members. Yeah. Honorable members, I would have interjected, Mr. Honorable Member, because I think you were taking the argument to the extreme. I have no issue if you're saying that there are alternative means of spending but you are now stressing or going beyond, I think, the leeway I should give you. Yeah, he did not say that the government spend the money, whether he inferred it or he didn't actually use the words. But Honorable Member, be careful how you tread, okay? Because you do not want anybody to believe that you're saying.
Mr. Speaker, I was very careful with my words. I came here at previous sittings of this House.
On a point of order. The member, yes, my colleague stood up, but I wanted to stand up. The member challenged any member on this side of the House to stand up and refute what he's saying there, and he said he's going to sit down and listen. So I'm doing that right now, Mr. Speaker. If
Honorable member,
I am standing up on the point, Mr. Speaker, that the honorable member said that he is challenging anybody on this side to stand up and question what he said there.
The amount paid.
And I am saying, Mr. Speaker, if an individual pays money for them to bring their plane to St. Lucia, what is that to the business of this honorable House or to the government of St. Lucia? If the member wants to use that as a point of argument about the borrowing and what he would support and what he would not support, Mr. Speaker, then I want to know the correlation between the expenditure mentioned in there and the relation to the bill, because, Mr. Speaker, note his words. The $500,000 could have been used for the distress fund. How is that not implying?
Honorable member, so accepted, and that is the ruling I was making to the honorable member. He may be inferring, he may have not said it directly, that the 500 came from government purses too, but yes. So honorable member, again I'm saying Be careful with your words. Again, I allowed you to go so far, but I think I would have pulled you back anyway because you've gone too far in my opinion. I understand you want to make an argument that the 7 million can be spent, but when you now move into the horses and implying other things, then you cross in that threshold. Remain on track. In aviation, remain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that can easily be refuted.
Don't say horses, just say shoe valve.
But Mr. Speaker,
The horses, that's the problem.
we all know,
Just say shoe valve.
we all know, Mr. Speaker. We have the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, continue.
Mr. Speaker, we all know that government sets the tone in any country. And I'm saying here this morning, as I will say anywhere else, once I am speaking on behalf of the people of Denver North, that in a country where $500,000 is being spent on the transportation of horses, Mr. Speaker,
From the United States.
from the US to here and Nora, I'm saying at the time when this is being done, the wrong signal is being sent.
And given a police guard.
The wrong signal is being spent.
They give them a
And I said, Mr. Speaker, in my preamble, that this is a government of misguided priorities.
Yeah, man, they get the horses
And-
the police escort.
And Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker, again, Mr. Speaker, I have to stand.
Honorable member. Let me. Honorable member, continue. I'm monitoring what you say.
thank you.
But Mr. Speaker, you have to have my point of order, Mr. Speaker.
If it is on the same point about the horses and the 500 million,
My
I am
point
handling this one. Yes. Continue, honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, je dis bon matin, that gouvernement Sarah Jamouche nous en tant qu'il passé, pour débuter venir en office. Il pas ni par des négociations. Et c'est pour raison ça là bon matin. Je ne suis pas confortable qu'à venir ici et puis qu'à supporter l'émotion que le gouvernement voulait prêter 7 millions l'argent américain pour faire chimie. Je vais donner plusieurs exemples. Depuis que le gouvernement venu au pouvoir, côté gouvernement Jamouche, il n'y a pas qu'à faire ça ici pour les faire. Et moi, il y a des difficultés avec ça. Et moi aussi, dit Mr. Speaker, dans l'air où on est dans un pays, et moi, je ne jamais dit que c'est le gouvernement qui fait. Là où on est dans un pays, qu'on a une manière cheval tapé traité, ou pas de confiance dans là où vient ici, et qu'on a une motion comme ça, ou qu'on a supporté. Parce que je passe ça à la constituency, et puis, je de nous qui manière ça a bénéfice pour vous. And that is my argument, Mr. Speaker. I have said before, nobody in here, the 17 of us, and we have a full house today, is responsible for COVID. We did not see it coming. I'm not even sure we have an appreciation of the impact of COVID. And all I'm saying is that with the little resources that are available to us, whether it's by way of cash flow or our ability to borrow, we have to rethink. We have to objectively engage people on how that money is supposed to be spent. And that is the crux of my argument this morning. And I will say that on behalf of the people of the North who are still awaiting payment for the bananas. This morning, Mr. Speaker, I got requests for laptop computers. The children want it. The parents want them. And I can't come here and say that instead of spending the money on the road, which I admit is in a bad condition, that we perhaps can consider laptop. That is not a valid argument. I can't put a case forward and say that even in this COVID period, although not in my constituency, that houses have been gutted by fire and people do not know who to turn to because they don't have insurance. I can't say that here. I can't say that my banana farmers or the ones in my constituency, they continue to toil, and these days they're battling a very, very difficult drought to produce. And when their fruits reach Barbados, Mr. Speaker, it has to be rejected. I can't ask that instead of putting $7 million US in a road, perhaps I'm not demanding, but I'm saying perhaps we can consider using that to bolster the banana management unit. Masadiza, Masa DOG government can make $7 million leverage.
Honorable member, you've said that. And I'm not stopping you. You've said that.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, this parliament is a place where we're supposed to come and speak freely on behalf of the people who sent us. I will not do like some. I'm not going to be warming up chairs in this parliament for long hours. I will not. I will speak. It would be a dereliction of duty. If I have the issues, I discuss them on the street corners in my constituency. I discuss them on constituency day. I discuss them when I meet my people at the bakery and elsewhere, and then come here, Mr. Speaker, and just take an overdose of Mumu tablet and don't speak. I'm speaking.
Yeah, horses before
I'm speaking.
Horses before people. Speak.
And I will not be silenced, Mr. Speaker. I will speak within the confines of the standing orders and I will make my point. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that with the Millennium Highway and the West Coast Road, the arrangement was already there. The government did not honor what they found when they came into office. The arrangement that we had with OFID. They suspended the project. And today, amidst COVID, when the Prime Minister has engaged almost every civil society organization, trade unions, churches, whoever, to try and get them to understand the impact of COVID. And Mr. Speaker, as I've said, COVID exacerbated what was already a bad situation. But whether you were well placed prior to COVID, or you were not on solid grounds, as was the case with us in St. Lucia, it has made the situation worse. And I'm not going to fault the Prime Minister or anybody for that. All I'm saying is that the government must make provisions for expression of alternative points of view to what they bring here and what they're proposing. And our position is not predicated on malice. We want to see St. Lucia do well. But we want to, but some persons believe that once you come here and you have a position that is contrary to what they are advocating, you are not for the good of this country. That is not consistent, Mr. Speaker, with progressive thinking. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am saying, yes, the road is in a chronic state of disrepair. The Millennium Highway has been so for a while. And I, like a lot of St. Lucians, Mr. Speaker, want to see that road get some attention. But I'm only saying, Mr. Speaker, and asking the question, is that really a priority today? Can that wait? Can we put the money, I have to repeat it for repetition for emphasis. Can, Mr. Speaker, that money be put to help families that have been displaced and affected by COVID? Can it, Mr. Speaker? This is my argument. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying on behalf of the people of Denry North that I am not convinced, in as much as I understand the need for the repairs, that this is the best time to put $7.9 million into the rehabilitation of this road. If I can be convinced otherwise, Mr. Speaker, so be it. But as it stands, and given the information that I have, the dynamics that I confront every day on the ground in my constituency and elsewhere in this country, I'm asking, Mr. Speaker, perhaps the government can reconsider the timing of this project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Suez Address.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning in support of the motion to borrow US $7.945 million, which is counterpart financing to reconstruct the Millennium Highway, Road and the West Coast Road, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, maybe as one of the more green parliamentarians, I enjoy parliamentary discussion, I enjoy parliamentary debate. I sit back and I learn. I learn from my colleagues, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I cannot sit down in this chamber and be the recipient of a line to mislead the country and not stand up. So, Mr. Speaker, this was the reason why I stood up, and I think the honourable member knows very well what he was inciting with the message that he was sending out. But all that being said, Mr. Speaker, I find it passing strange that the honourable member would not support the lending of the counterpart financing in support of the intention of the repairs of the road. Because, Mr. Speaker, with the exception of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, every member opposite represent a constituency where that road is significantly used by members, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, this is a road that I use almost every day, Mr. Speaker, and sometimes when I drive on that road, Mr. Speaker, it's a roller coaster, Mr. Speaker. It is a roller coaster. I think what the member opposite should be very wary of, at least from in my recent memory, Mr. Speaker, the number of fatalities we've had on that highway, that Millennium Highway. And I don't have the statistics, Mr. Speaker, but I am very certain that he may well know somebody who may have either lost a limb or may have lost a life, Mr. Speaker. And as a government, Mr. Speaker, I think it's very important when we recognize, what we can do to improve road conditions, to mitigate some of these, Mr. Speaker, we should, When you think of some of the mishaps that have happened on that road, Mr. Speaker, it brings back some very sad memories. And I know my colleague from Castries South would appreciate some of the thinking as it relates to something that have happened on that highway, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, as a government, we recognize the growing use of the Millennium Highway, particularly now, Mr. Speaker, that the OKU hospital has moved in that into, and we can expect a lot more traffic on that highway, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, dead men tell no tales. So I cannot ask anybody, who has been in an accident and where they have lost their life as to, was it as a result of the bumping? Yes, you may have had some speed, but if it was a safely constructed road, would you have had that same impact, Mr. Speaker? These are the kind of things we have to think of, Mr. Speaker, when you come to the House and you indicate that you don't think the timing is right to put in $8 million into. Mr. Speaker, I have heard members opposite speak to this government seem to be focusing on a lot of road development and, Mr. Speaker, in my community, and there's a lot of conversation as it relates to electioneering projects. Election is coming. Mr. Speaker, as far as this Parliament, from 2017, every project we have done, the opposition has indicated it's an election project. Every project we have done from 2017, they have indicated it's an election project. But, Mr. Speaker, people no longer are gullible to these kind of things. People no longer just swallow things wholesale. Because, Mr. Speaker, if you want to talk about electioneering and electioneering campaigning, Mr. Speaker, the week of elections in Shosel, the week of elections, distribution of plywood, cement, and lumber, Mr. Speaker. Plywood, lumber, and cement, Mr. Speaker. I have been given plywood, lumber, and cement from 2017. I will not wait for the week of election to give plywood, lumber, and cement. I have been given that, Mr. Speaker, from 2017. Mr. Speaker, you want to speak about road work, Mr. Speaker? 2 months before the last general elections, Mr. Speaker, the Montet Road was given what we thought was a makeover, Mr. Speaker. That road is in condition right now that the people in the community are clamoring for redress, Mr. Speaker, and they will get it, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Infrastructure, Speaker, has promised me that road. So that will be another road campaign, Mr. Speaker. But it's not an election campaign. It is something that the people deserve, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak about roadworks. Roadworks in Choiseul, Mr. Speaker. My memory serves me well. I will agree, the people of Durban got a new road under the last administration, Mr. Speaker. But when we came into office, Mr. Speaker, that road was a suicide mission. That road was pure gravel, Mr. Speaker. And I remember driving down and I said, my God, boy, something will happen to somebody on that road, Mr. Speaker. And it was when we came in, we sealed that road, Mr. Speaker. And if, Mr. Speaker, I could tell you just, I want to be correct, just about 8 months ago, Mr. Speaker, a busload people, Mr. Speaker, fortunately there was a big mango tree that prevented it from going on to the precipice. You know why, Mr. Speaker? The road was built with no regard to railings or anything like that, Mr. Speaker. People's lives, Mr. Speaker, are important. And I will tell the members opposite and St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, if you want to see how a road is built, very soon they will have the Saltibus Road gone, people. A road that has been, people have been clamoring for, Mr. Speaker, for donkey years, Mr. Speaker, and it's going to be a first-class road, Mr. Speaker, where a lot of attention was being paid to retaining walls, Mr. Speaker, which is a critical component of that area, Mr. Speaker. You want to talk about roads, Mr. Speaker? I will give the member from Viewfort South credit to what he did for our Park Estate Gaiwa Road, Mr. Speaker. He started putting some drains, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, talk about waste of resources. Mr. Speaker, I challenge you, that road, the drains, Mr. Speaker, are at least a foot above the road. And you know what happens, Mr. Speaker? When it rains, the water don't get the drains, you know. The water runs through the road. The water, it's coming. It's coming under the feeder road program. It's coming. You will see it soon. It is coming under the feeder road program, Mr. Speaker. It's coming. Take your time. Take your time. It will be a nice and scenic shortcut for you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker, when we first came in office, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker, when we first came into office.
Honorable members. Honorable members. Honorable members. Take note. I am now prepared. I think I've crossed that. Honorable member Babylon. I think I have crossed the threshold when standing order 43 will be used. Continue with members. Choiseul.
I don't have much more to say, Mr. Speaker. I'll be very brief. But Mr. Speaker, since I mentioned it, Mr. Speaker, the Gaiwa Park Estate Road, Mr. Speaker, is being looked at seriously as one of our feeder roads, Mr. Speaker, and we are going to give some much needed attention to it, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I support 100% the counterpart financing to support the grant provided to us, Mr. Speaker, for the rehabilitation of the Millennium Highway and the West Coast Road project. I thank you.
Honorable member Soufre Fonseca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the good people of Soufre Fonseca, whom I am very proud and honored to serve, I rise to give my full support to the motion presented here this morning by the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, for US $7.9 million as counterpart funding to the West Coast Road Millennium Highway reconstruction project, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this road is a vital link between the economic hub of the country, the city Castries, and Sulphur City, Soufre. This is a road, Mr. Speaker, where on a daily basis you have hundreds, if not thousands of visitors traversing the Millennium Highway through the West Coast into our beautiful town of Soufre for Saint-Jacques, bringing much needed support to the people of Soufre for Saint-Jacques, to the attraction sites, Mr. Speaker, to the restaurants, to the bars, the water taxi operators, the taxi drivers in Soufre, and many, many other persons in this beautiful town of ours, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this road is also extremely important to the minibus operators in Soufrière. The free F minibuses, you're speaking of persons like Fitzroy, Power, Carriers, Kevin, and all those minibus drivers who have been clamoring for many, many years, in fact for decades, Mr. Speaker, for the reconstruction of this road. And I am extremely proud this morning that the Honorable Prime Minister, this government, have made it a priority that we undertake a total reconstruction of this road. Mr. Speaker, normally the member from Dennery North is usually on course, he usually navigates the seas properly, but today I do not know what spiced tea he drank in the valley. He has diverted and he has gone all over the place. But he'll be excused, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we want to say this morning that every single road in St. Lucia is a priority for this government. Every single road. And hence the reason why, Mr. Speaker, we are investing over $200 million in roads in this country. And the West Coast Road, Mr. Speaker, if I listen to the leader of the opposition this morning, he alluded to the OFID fund where 6.7 kilometers of road was funded for $44 million. That, Mr. Speaker, is only the Millennium Highway. So it means that the rest of the West Coast was not a priority for the previous administration, Mr. Speaker. The people of Ansel Canries, the people of Soufrière Jacques, and by extension, Choiseul was not a priority under the reconstruction of the efforts back in 2015. Because 6.7 kilometers of road, Mr. Speaker, cannot get you from Castries to Soufrière. The priority roads for them, Mr. Speaker, was the north, as alluded to by the leader of the opposition. But with this government, this administration, the parliamentary representatives of the West Coast, we want the West, the East, the South, the North to be priority in road construction and rehabilitation for this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the member for Dennery North to stand in this honorable house and not lend support to this bill, to this motion, Mr. Speaker, a motion that is a bill that is going to generate much needed jobs for the people of the West Coast of the country, the people whom the members opposite profess to love and care about so much, Mr. Speaker, and an embarrassment for the member for Dennery North and the members opposite to stand in this honorable house and not support this motion presented here today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, countless of jobs will be created with this road construction project. Our small, middle-sized contractors, Mr. Speaker, they are going to be able to build up on their capacity. Our unemployed persons, now, as a result of COVID, they are now going to get an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to earn a decent income as a result of the West Coast Road project. And I cannot, for one reason, believe that honorable members would stand in this honorable house this morning and go against such a motion for the people of the West Coast of this country, the people of Ancillary Canaries, the people of Soufrière Jacques, and by extension, the people of Choiseul, Mr. Speaker. I cannot understand it. Mr. Speaker, the member for Dennery North again alluded to what have we done, what can you show that you have done with almost $7 billion in 4 years. Today, Mr. Speaker, I want to challenge the member from Dennery North, my very good friend, to come down to Soufrière and let me give him a tour of Soufrière to show him what we have done in Soufrière for the past 4 years. Well, he's always there. I challenge him to come down, Mr. Speaker, because I could show him through the nook and cranny corners of Soufrière what we have done for the past 4 years that they never did in 20 years in Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. I can show him that, Mr. Speaker. So that is why I tell you, Mr. Speaker, he is usually on point But this morning, I do not know what he drank. He had to divert to another direction, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, without any further delay, I want to reaffirm my support for this motion on behalf of the people of Soufrière Fossé Jacques. And I know the Honorable Member for Castries North, the Minister for Infrastructure, will tell us more about all the tenders and all what the Leader of the Opposition brought up against this very motion today, Mr. Speaker. So I want to thank the British government for the aid that they have granted us with this project. I also want to thank the Honorable Member for Castries North, the Minister of Infrastructure, for his sterling leadership on this project, as well as the Minister of Finance for supporting the project and all the staff of the Ministry of Infrastructure. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Grosley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the motion before us. And while my constituency is not directly impacted by the construction of the roads on the West Coast and the Millennium Highway, my constituents use those roads when traversing the country to the south, when going to the airport, and what have you. However, Mr. Speaker, the bigger reason why I stand in support of this borrowing of $7.9 million US, which is counterpart funding, as we've been told, for the construction of those roads, is for the economic impact it will have for the socio-economic development of this country, given the circumstances that we face right now with this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, every effort should be made, no effort should be spared in attempting to change course and to provide a different trajectory as far as economic development is concerned, given the fact that our main industry, our main income earner, tourism, has been pretty much decimated by this coronavirus, and we are not certain, and we see no bright light immediately appearing on the horizon as far as the return of normalcy in this industry as far as that is concerned. So, Mr. Speaker, it is important that as a country, we take whatever steps we can. We pursue whatever measures that are within our powers to bring back as much economic activity as possible in this country and to provide jobs and economic growth to St. Lucia to the extent that we can, given the limitations that have been created by this virus that we face as a global pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I think it is disingenuous on the part of some of the members of the opposition to suggest that this should not be a priority. Yes, as we have done, we must pursue stimulus packages and social programs. We have done it, we will continue to do it. But at the same time, we must remember that if we are to ensure the survival of this country, and we are to ensure that coming out of this pandemic, that St. Lucia finds itself on a path where it is possible for us to recover as quickly as possible, we must pursue whatever economic activities that we can. I was very disturbed when I heard the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, make mention of roads in the Grosley area, almost as if to suggest that that should not be pursued. Mr. Speaker, I will defend with every fiber in my body the right of the citizens of the Grosley constituency to proper roads for them to navigate on the I will not argue the fact that, that we make more than a significant contribution to national development, national economic development by way of taxes and what have you. I'm saying just as every other constituency, just as every other citizen, we in Grosley are entitled to better roads. As their representative, I made that solemn promise in 2016 that this term would be the term when I pursue primarily the repairs of their roads. I understand, Mr. Speaker, as a politician myself, the trepidation and the fear that the pursuit of that promise brings about to the opposition. The fulfillment of that promise, I know, may dash many hopes. But now is not the time to put political consideration ahead of national development and people's interests. Mr. Speaker, I heard the member from Denry North make reference to debt. And he attempted to paint a picture to suggest that when his regime was in office, that they were more judicious than we were with public debt. I want to quote a simple figure without going into any details. I want to just quote a simple figure that will debunk that misinformation. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind the honorable member that as far as debt is concerned, government debt expanded by an average of 3.6% in the 3 years 2017 to 2019. Relative to that, in the previous 3 years, 2014 to 2016, government debt grew by on average by 4.5%. Mr. Speaker. So that in itself tells you that the misinformation that is being pursued, the mischief that is being pursued, Mr. Speaker, is for political aggrandizement and not for the interests of this country. Mr. Speaker, I have even sat here and watched the behavior of some of the members opposite. The shameful, disgraceful behavior where they take you on to the point, Mr. Speaker, where you have to vacate the chair to bring back some semblance of sanity, normalcy, and peace and order in this chamber. Mr. Speaker, what is being perpetrated, what the opposition is inciting in this country today, I want to stand there to say, is akin to treason. And I say so, because,
Honorable member, just be careful with your words. You do not want to give.
I'm being very careful with my words. I am being very careful with my words, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
Protest you are denied.
Honorable members.
And Mr. Speaker, if we want to talk about protests, and I would like to be heard in silence, Mr. Speaker, as provided under the standing orders of this honorable House. I will not have you shout across while I'm speaking.
Member, please continue, sir.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as long as you take control of this House, I will continue. I want to be heard in silence.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, I have no opposition, no problem with protests as long as it is within the law, as long as it is peaceful. I have no problems with that. But some members who want to incite protests to cause division, or that may lead to disruption.
Honorable member, our standing orders, the one that you ask that we follow, makes it clear that we should not impute improper motives to members, whether of this House or the other House. And again, I'm going to ask you to be very control with your words and do not in any way impute improper motives on our members of this House.
Mr. Speaker, I'm fully cognizant of the provisions of the standing order, and I'm very well familiar with all the subsections of Standing Order 35. I have not accused anyone of anything. I said I will not support inciting protest for the purpose of causing destruction. That is what I said. And I repeat that.
Honorable member, I have continued, but I've just said to you.
And I would like your protection, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am saying that at this time, it is incumbent of every single member sitting in this honorable House to come together in the national interest. This is not a time for the pursuit of political interests. And when we, given the circumstances that we face today, pursue any interest that can be detrimental to the development of our country, to our survival coming out of this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, we have to be careful that while we may enjoy immediate gain, the question is, down the road, what will be the value of that gain? Because you can set a precedence that you may not be prepared to deal with if you succeed in the goal that you pursue. And I'm just saying so to ask every member here to be mindful that this is not a time when we, as leaders in this country, should be inciting any division. This is a time for us to come together to see how best we can overcome this crisis that is global in nature, that we as a small island are facing. I do not believe that it is insurmountable for us to overcome the crisis that we are facing. But Mr. Speaker, some of the things that we have to do, we must do. One of the things that we must do is the pursuit of economic development in this country for the provision of economic activity, provision of jobs, and to ensure that this country can come out of this pandemic better prepared than we went in. When we develop our highways and byways, Mr. Speaker, when the tourism industry returns to normalcy, we would have had a better product to welcome tourists back to our shores. That in itself will make us more economically competitive in the future. So when you spend money on such projects, that is money well spent. Mr. Speaker, I've advocated in this honorable House that you don't just spend money because it is at your disposal. I have advocated, given our circumstances, we do not have the luxury of wasting money. We have to invest money. This, Mr. Speaker, I applaud as a worthy investment that will redound to the benefit of the country and its citizens. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that going forward, I will support every move, because I know my friends with financial and economic background may have a little problem and difficulty with some of the social programs. I want to take this opportunity, while I advocate for economic development, that we look at socio-economic development as a whole. And that is what this government is doing. To advocate that we take money and just give to people, Mr. Speaker, that is not the kind of mindset we want to create. That is not the kind of country we want to build. That is not the kind of development we want to pursue. We want our people to understand that we all will be far better off if we have a workforce that is prepared to put their shoulder to the wheel and to work for what they want. Yes, Mr. Speaker, there are those who are incapable for various reasons, either by virtue of age, illness, or other physical circumstances, who may not be able to fend for themselves. And we as a state have to take care of those people. Mr. Speaker, I stood here during the debate on the estimates, and I said, and I will repeat, I am proud to say that I am associated with an administration that even at these crucial times, I got an increase for social programs. So when you hear talk, Mr. Speaker, about this administration not caring, not providing for the vulnerable and the poor, Mr. Speaker, that is just political rhetoric that is intended to mislead. And there's a lot of propaganda that is just being disseminated, Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of misleading. Only this morning, I was asked by a constituent, in fact, a constituent expressed disgust only this morning to me, indicating that she thought it was very unfair that in the midst of COVID-19, that we as a government took a salary increase of 55%. Mr. Speaker, I took the pain, I took the trouble to explain that that was not the case. That is propaganda being peddled, but that is not the truth, that is not the reality. As you would be aware, Mr. Speaker, there was the salary review committee set up in 2007, who deliberated, did their work, and submitted a report to the cabinet in 2009. They recommended an increase for permanent secretaries, deputy permanent secretaries, Governor General, Speaker of the House, parliamentarians. Mr. Speaker, this administration was in office then. We considered the current economic situation at the time. We proceeded to provide permanent secretaries, deputy permanent secretaries, and other civil servants with their increase. But we deferred our increase. That is the truth. That is the reality. Mr. Speaker, upon return to office in 2016, I recall distinctly the matter was raised because some members of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, indicated that they were entitled to that salary increase and that they wanted the salary increase. That was a matter debated in cabinet. And the conclusion by cabinet is that yes, we recognize that it was recommended that parliamentarians get the increase, but as soon as we were able to put the economy on a better footing, we would issue those payments. Mr. Speaker, I didn't agree to that position because I am well off, or because I didn't need it. I agreed to that position in the interests of our country. Mr. Speaker, however, we are a law-abiding country. We are a law-abiding administration. The actual truth is, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that the individual did not have a right to do so, but let's not mislead the country and try to score political points by spreading propaganda. The truth is, this administration was taken to the court of law and challenged for not having paid that increase. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the individual won because by law, parliamentarians were entitled to that increase, an increase that was long delayed for various reasons that I've mentioned, some of which I've mentioned. Mr. Speaker, the matter was taken to a court of law. You had an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, there are members here who had an opportunity to explain the position as I am doing now, but instead made misleading statements to suggest that I did not take any salary increase during COVID-19, and if I was given any salary increase, I would return it. Instead of simply explaining, as I am doing right now, what the situation is. We must stop that kind of naked, unashamed pursuit of political office.
Billion-dollar liars.
The time will come for a political campaign. Now is a time of crisis. You have to put your shoulders to the wheel, support the administration in ensuring that we come out of this situation for the better, for our people. Mr. Speaker, I am fully cognizant of the fact that mistruth can come in various forms. It can come by omission.
It can come by $1 billion.
It can come by implying. It can be left to people to make deductions. And it is cleverly done by some of us here. Cleverly done by some of us here. Instead of being open, frank, and honest. That is what is required now, not political interests, personal political interests, the pursuit of political office that I'm seeing that is taking place right now. Now is not the time for that. An election is due in a year. An election is due in a year. There will be time enough. And Mr. Speaker, having said so, I want us as leaders in this honorable house, I want us in this honorable house to understand as leaders in a democratic country, democracy requires certain principles be adhered to and observed. After an election, you have to respect the outcome of the election. I want to say directly to the members opposite, you do not come and make threatening remarks and try to incite any negativity on the part of your supporters instead of accepting and observing the fact that another regime has won, congratulate them and allow them to function and govern like we allow you all to do when you're winning elections. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, I do not want to take away from there. But remember where we are.
I didn't get the motion.
I was saying to you, Honorable Member, that the motion
I'm
before...
hearing you because of the crosstalk.
Just remember what is before us.
Pardon?
I'm saying I'm not wanting to take a thunder.
Okay.
But remember the motion before us.
Mr. Speaker, I am on target. I am on topic. Mr. Speaker, we are being told that we should not pursue the borrowing of those funds because we should instead give people money to assist them, not acknowledging the social programs that are in place right now, that we cannot be trusted, that it is because of elections. And the paranoia of politicians on that side, Mr. Speaker, will not deter the government of St. Lucia from pursuing the development program. So, Mr. Speaker, there is a lot that is being said out there. At a time when I want to reiterate that we should come together and do everything that we can to support the development program of this country. There are obstructionists in here and out there. There are people who spread propaganda, wanton propaganda, knowing fully well that what they are saying is misleading. And there are those who are trying to derail the program of the government for fear that if those programs are implemented, their political prospects will be diminished. Mr. Speaker, it's not about any political prospects. It is about the development of our country. You would be aware, Mr. Speaker, like everyone sitting around this table here is today, that when it comes to the development of this country, that is, if you look up the St. Lucian dictionary, you will see synonym for United Workers' Party. Accompanying the reign of the United Workers' Party is an upswing in development in this country. I wish I could have said the same for my colleagues on the other side. Mr. Speaker, to suggest that we have done nothing. Mr. Speaker, when we assumed office in 2016, I want to remind every member sitting here that the unemployment rate was at an unprecedented 25% in this country. Mr. Speaker, prior to COVID-19, now here another talk that we mismanaged before COVID-19, that's why we're in this situation here. As if people don't listen to news and people do not know what is happening in other countries. St. Lucia is in a bubble by itself. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind members that prior to COVID-19, this administration had reduced unemployment by a whopping 9%. Mr. Speaker, you call that nothing? Honorable member from Denver North, Mr. Speaker, calls that nothing? These are the things they put you in office to do. Not grow what is supposed to shrink and shrink what is supposed to grow. Mr. Speaker, we grew the economy. We shrunk the unemployment rate. They grew the unemployment rate and shrunk the economy. So it is not surprising to me. It is not surprising to me that they have it all upside down. And that is why, when they speak, they give you the reverse of reality. Mr. Speaker, yes, to an extent I'm an idealist, but I am also a realist. The circumstances we face right now is one that requires many sacrifices. And Mr. Speaker, among the sacrifices that we are to make as a government, we have begun making them. Prioritizing where we invest the country's resources. When we borrow, we make that borrowing an investment for this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to call on all St. Lucians, including members of the opposition, to recognize that we are all in this together. It requires sacrifices by every single St. Lucian. And I suspect that some of the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, may want to think that they are sacrificing their political prospects if they do the right thing. But St. Lucians recognize people for the right thing. Sometimes I must admit, the reward is delayed. I've had the experience where it has been delayed. But righteousness always comes to those who are just. And we want to manage the situation in an even-handed, righteous, and just manner. For every St. Lucian, Mr. Speaker, we recognize the pain that many St. Lucians are going through as a result of the loss of employment. Mr. Speaker, which better government would you trust with the management of this situation right now and going forward, but a government that knows how to reduce unemployment? So, Mr. Speaker, when you see us taking measures such as rebuilding roads, and not just the Millennium Highway, the Honorable Member for Suffolk told you we're going to spend over $200 million in road. I know that is frightening. If you are an aspirant to political office and you're not on this side, I know that is threatening. I know that is disheartening. But remember, it is national development. It is in the interest of our people. And if you are concerned and interested in the interest of our people and the development of our country, you put your political aspirations as being secondary when you know and you realize that the country is in safe hands, the country is heading in the right direction. What you ought to do is lend your support. You'll get more political credit for that than to try to derail and obstruct. That is my advice to those who are attempting to throw a bad light on what we are doing. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. You can tell the people what you want. Rhetoric, talk. But we, on the other hand, will show the people what we are doing. Work, delivery. So, Mr. Speaker, I am not fazed. I am disappointed. I'm disappointed because I see on the other side many seasoned politicians who have been around in and out of office and ought to know what obtains. Yes, you have not handled any crisis to the magnitude of what we are dealing with right now. But even out of those crises, you did not manage the economy. You did not bring down the unemployment rate. You did not fulfill all the promises that you made, the projects that you talked about. We, in spite of this crisis, will deliver to our people. And Mr. Speaker, you asked me to stay on topic. We're talking about roads, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I promise the constituency of Grosily. Having been given a constituency with the most deplorable roads that you will see anywhere, both in terms of condition and numbers, I promise them that it will take a Herculean effort on my part to make a significant dent in upgrading the conditions of these roads. Mr. Speaker, I stand by that statement that I am going to make a significant dent in the upgrade of the roads in the constituency of Groseley. If, Mr. Speaker, by the end of my tenure, I will not have provided upgrade and maintenance for at least 40 of the bad roads I have in my constituency, I will not seek re-election. I want this statement to be recorded. They promised me. Yeah, I will. You know I will get my roads. I will get my roads.
But it will stab you in your back.
I will get my roads. And you know why I will get my roads? Because I am part of an administration that recognizes that we have to deliver. When we make promises, we have to stand by our promises. And I know how uncomfortable it makes some to hear what I'm saying. I know how uncomfortable it makes some to hear that. But Mr. Speaker, I have always delivered, and I will stay with the administration that delivers, because I want to continue to deliver. So, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, I want to commend this resolution for the support of the entire House. It is not too late for some people here to retract. It is not too late to make a turnabout. Because you will be judged, Mr. Speaker, you will be judged by how you respond to the interest and the benefit of the people. And if you try to obstruct, they will see you as an obstructionist. If you do not support their interests, they will know that you are against them. Mr. Speaker, it is not about politics right now. It is about socio-economic growth and returning this country on an even keel, coming out of COVID-19 in the near future, that we can be even stronger and better than we were going into COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, once again, I give my full, wholehearted, unequivocal support to this motion that is before the House. Thank you very much.
Honorable Member for Bawana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give support to this resolution. And of course, Mr. Speaker, when you listen to the members on the other side, they too express the need for a project like that to be implemented. And you heard them, Mr. Speaker, giving support to our initiative as it pertains to improving the condition of these roads. But what they are saying, Mr. Speaker, the timing is not good. Mr. Speaker, they are saying that we should put the project aside and utilize the resources in other areas. For example, Mr. Speaker, you heard about agriculture. The member for Denver North spoke about using the resources for agriculture, using the resources for a laptop program, Mr. Speaker, using the resources for a distress fund. But Mr. Speaker, I sat down there and I'm asking myself, am I hearing correctly? Am I hearing that the members are advising us that we should put resources into agriculture, we should put resources into a laptop program, we should put resources into a social program, we should put resources into a distress fund? And I reflected a bit, Mr. Speaker. Just only last week, Mr. Speaker, we came into this honorable house to seek approval to do these same things that they are asking us to do. And all of them, Mr. Speaker, voted against it.
Speaker.
Last week, Mr. Speaker.
Just on a point of order for my own.
Last week, Mr. Speaker.
He's standing on a point. Let me hear.
Unless you're going to be pointing out which motions last week had to do with money borrowing for laptops. Which motion last week was for borrowing money for the laptop program?
Mr. Speaker.
Continue on.
Mr. Speaker, just last week, we came here to get approval to borrow money from the IMF, Mr. Speaker, and all of them voted against it. When the Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, articulated to this Honorable House where the resources are going to be used. For example, Mr. Speaker, the Agricultural Transformation Project, we should borrow money to improve the BAM, the BIP project. Last week, Mr. Speaker, you voted against me. You heard that we should borrow money to support the banana project. Last week, Mr. Speaker, you voted against me. Last week, we had an allocation from the IMF fund, Mr. Speaker, for the Agricultural Transformation Project for $545,000 to support the Agricultural Transformation Project. You voted against me. Last week, Mr. Speaker, we came here and we said we wanted $1.8 million for our banana project. You voted against me. Last week, Mr. Speaker, we came here and we said we have $7.3 million for support for agriculture. You voted against me. And this week, today, they're telling us, Mr. Speaker, that we should not borrow money to fix the roads, we should borrow money to put in agriculture. But what's the confusion, Mr. Speaker? The confusion. Now I'm hearing, what will I tell my constituency? I heard a member from Delhi North saying, what will I tell my constituency? So on the constituency, cement passé, les gouvernements flambeaux venir à Kaila pour borrow l'argent pour agriculture, ou vote against me. C'est ça pour voir the constituency. Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing that we should give support, Mr. Speaker, to persons who have lost their job. Si même passé nous venons ici, nous disons nous avons 24 millions de dollars, Mr. Speaker. 24 millions de dollars from the IMF fund pour bailler support pour les gens qui peuvent travailler, les gens qui peuvent contribuer pour NIC. What we call the non-NIC contributors. You vote against me. Aujourd'hui, on va venir dire nous. On va venir dire aujourd'hui that l'argent nous a borré pour faire chimère, pas borré, fait même pas là, nous dire qu'il a fait dans les semaines passées. Pas fait là. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking myself, am I hearing correctly? Are these members on the opposite side not remembering the House? They're forgetting this, Mr. Speaker. The Speaker gives support to this borrowing because, like the Prime Minister said, I said we should put it aside. We're not putting it aside, Mr. Speaker. We're moving too fast. Oh, this government is moving too fast. But it's a government that moves fast. It's a government that implements projects. Not a government that sits down and wait for things to happen, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to sit down and wait for things to happen. We're moving fast. And we deliver, Mr. Speaker. That is the government that I belong to, under the leadership of Honorable Alan Shasley, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we heard about distress fund. I want to ask a member from Delhi North. Since he has been in opposition, Mr. Speaker, have you experienced someone unfortunately losing their homes through a cause of fire and apply to this government and he have not gotten support? Yes. Have you? Yes. Because I'm aware why the distress fund is not there, based on information I'm hearing much more money than the distress fund giving support to persons who are going to work. Speaker, it's just that we're not called the distress fund, but we are all giving support to our people who have lost their homes, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, when I'm hearing, Mr. Speaker, when I'm hearing that we should do more social programs, and you heard the member from Rosile, who is responsible for the social programs, indicated that we have put more money as a government into the social programs than the opposition, Mr. Speaker. And that is a government that we are well rounded in what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, when I listen to the member from Catherine East, and I'm quoting him, Mr. Speaker, he said, the project started in July 2015, and an allocation of 34.1 million EC dollars was allocated for the project. No problem with that. But there was a problem, Mr. Speaker. Then he said that in April, he said in 2015, there was an allocation of 34.1 million EC dollars. But in April 2016, Mr. Speaker, they got support from IFID to come and do an assessment of the project. So, où est le travail? Du vendeur. How it is, you can mettre an allocation pour un projet, but you can cost projet. So, you can cost projet after one day la. C'est pas même un travail. And that is how they have been operating, Mr. Speaker. If you look at all the projects that we form as it pertains to capital investment, all that we formed, Mr. Speaker, they were undercosted. All of them. And we had to go back and renegotiate and get resources to do these projects. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, and that is why we are coming here today, because we have done the costing. And Mr. Speaker, if you look at the estimates that was approved in April, and that's why I think it's surprising that they're giving the impression, Mr. Speaker, that we are coming here to borrow new money. We approved the estimates. And in the estimates, Mr. Speaker, page 585, clearly provisions was made, Mr. Speaker. Provisions on the number, project number 0057. Clearly provisions were made for that project in the estimates. So why are you giving the impression, Mr. Speaker, that we're coming here to borrow money? We are coming here to borrow, like it's additional money we're coming here to borrow. We are coming here to borrow money to implement the projects that we say we are going to do it. We are coming here to borrow money because we are not going to move slowly, Mr. Speaker. Like has been advised by those on the other side. We are government to move fast. And in the estimates, Mr. Speaker, $120 million was provided for in the project. So when you make a comparison, in 2015, they had allocated $34.1 million to do that project, and now when we went through and we did an analysis, Mr. Speaker, we realized that the project is costing $120 million. So, Mr. Speaker, you see how they have been operating on the whole aspect of cost overrun? That's how cost overrun started, you know, because they underestimate projects. They just put money, allocate money without doing the due diligence for projects, Mr. Speaker. And when now they start to implement the project, they're realizing that the monies that they allocated for these projects are not sufficient. Then that is why you see the projects have been inflated. Cost overrun. But Mr. Speaker, I want to say here today that use that resource for any other program apart from what we are asking for, because it is counterpart funding, and that is the key thing. Is counterpart funding, and I'm sure they know the meaning of this, Mr. Speaker. So when they're going to tell us borrow the money and pay, buy laptops, borrow the money and put it in agriculture, which we have already done. We have done it. When they tell us borrow the money and put it in distress fund, we have made an allocation in the distress fund to support our persons who have experienced, you know, fire at their home. We have that, Mr. Speaker. And more serious now, the only thing we're looking at is construction as a means of creating employment. I said last week, Mr. Speaker, that whilst we don't have a booming construction activities taking place, the results are showing that despite that, we have been able to reduce unemployment. We have been able to increase our GDP. We are seeing growth, Mr. Speaker. So I'm saying that I am supporting the idea. So when you come and tell me to follow your plans, follow which plans? Which plans are you asking us to follow? The plans that have failed this country? The plans that people have rejected? That's all you ask us to follow, Mr. Speaker? And I heard the member from Castries is indicating there are many other ways to create employment. Now enough. I'm saying that if the member from Castries is and the members opposite are telling us that there are many other ways to create employment, and when you look at the records are showing us that the ways that they are looking to create employment is creating unemployment. You know? So all I can do is talk. And I said, talk and not talk. Mr. Speaker, I want to say here today. I want to tell the member for doing enough. Go back in your constituency. Et puis, dis gouvernement a mis la hala pour FIG. Dis gouvernement a mis la hala pour assister à l'école. Dis gouvernement a mis la hala pour laptop. Dis gouvernement a mis la hala pour santé. Et puis l'argent ça a support pour ces gens qui besoin que ce support. Ce n'est pas venir ici à demander des questions qui sont à dire ces gens. Là d'où pour aider ces gens, l'argent. I do ça. Ça on peut dire, Mr. Speaker, that moi travaille avec le gouvernement, moi représentation pour jouer un support qui est nécessaire pour gens donner une offre. Et puis pour toutes ces raisons, ces constituencies-là, qui ont beaucoup de Mr. Speaker. So I'm a bit taken aback because it's not a situation where we can ask for money that we have not programmed for. It's part of our estimates. It's part of our project for 2020, 2021. So all we are doing, because we said we're going to borrow the money, Mr. Speaker, is contemplate funding. We need to get the resources so we can get the money from the donor agency to start the project. And I think it's a project that's worth taking place, Mr. Speaker, and I want to support the Honorable Prime Minister, and I want to support all major stakeholders as it pertains to the implementation of that project. So I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, in terms of time management and the management overall, can I get an indication from members as of now, is there any intention to speak on this motion? Very likely after lunch. Yes, there is? Yes? Yes? Okay. Yeah, 2 o'clock then. Suspension to...
Speaker, I beg that the House be suspended for 1 hour to break for lunch.
Honorable members, the question is that the House do stand suspended for next hour. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is suspended.
The Honorable House stands suspended for the next hour. It is 1:09 p.m. The debate, will continue on the motion being forwarded at this time. Do stay tuned. We will be having the resumption of the parliamentary proceedings in an hour's time after the lunch break of the Honorable MPs. Carlton?
Eh bien, oui, messieurs, dames, nous avons un argument en fait, il vient pour ce Parlement à ce motion qui devant qu'il consiste, quoi, ou qu'il observe que nous avons une position et puis là, il y a déjeuner pour temps que qui bail là c'est yon du temps et après du temps ça nous kay consit ka vie ici encore changer gouvernement ici et puis yo ha vini pour présenter 4 motions devant Kaila. Les venir parmi ça qui a discuté, c'est pour prêter l'argent qui est presque 8 millions de dollars. Les venir pour ranger chimé tunnel de Millennium comme nous savons. Quoi, il y aura point en pause ici, nous allons pour plus tard après-midi. Merci tellement bien.